I'm trying to find myself. This sentence appears everywhere, from therapy sessions to online forums and in quiet conversations people have with themselves when life feels out of sync. But beneath its familiarity lies a strange question. If you are the one looking, then who or what is this self that's supposedly missing? Is there a real you hidden somewhere, like a lost item? Or is this search based on a flawed assumption that there's something solid, stable, and authentic waiting to be discovered? To explore this, we need to examine how psychology and philosophy understand the self. As it turns out, the idea of finding yourself might be more complicated and more interesting than it seems. In psychology, the self is not a fixed entity but a constructed concept, a working model of who we think we are. This model is shaped by memory, experience, feedback from others, and our own eternal narratives. Psychologist William James distinguished between two versions of the self. There's the I, which is the experiencing subject, the one who is aware. Then there is the me, the self as an object, a collection of traits, roles, and past experiences. When people talk about finding themselves, they are often referring to the me, a coherent story about who they are, but the I never gets lost. It's the one observing, the one doing the searching. In the sense, you are already present. What is missing is clarity about your personal narrative. This is why identity crisis, studied by Erik Erikson and later by James Marcia, are seen as developmental. They reflect a normal tension between roles, beliefs, and values as we transition through life stages. Searching for yourself is part of growth, not a sign of failure. A popular idea in both pop psychology and culture is that everyone has a true self, an inner essence that, once uncovered, leads to a more authentic life. But this idea is philosophically and psychologically contested. Carl Rogers, a humanistic psychologist, did argue for the concept of an actualizing self, where people move toward congruence, alignment between their lived experience and self-image. But even Rogers saw this as a process, not as uncovering a fixed identity. More critically, existentialist philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre rejected the idea of pre-existing self altogether. According to Sartre, existence precedes essence. In other words, we are not born with a fixed self, we create one through choices and action. Identity is not something we find, it is something we make. In a more radical view, David Hume, an 18th century philosopher, claimed that when he looked inward, he never found a self, only a stream of perceptions, thoughts, and feelings. No stable core, just constant mental activity. This aligns with what modern neuroscience suggests. The brain functions more like a network of modules than a centralized command center. There's no single location in the brain that holds the self. What we experience as a continuous identity may just be an ongoing mental narrative stitched together by memory and attention. Buddhist philosophy goes even further. According to the concept of anatta, or non-self, the idea of a permanent, unchanging self is an illusion. Instead, the mind is composed of changing elements, feelings, thoughts, impulses that arise and pass away. In this view, searching for a fixed self is like trying to grab water. The harder you try, the less you find. A significant portion of who we believe we are comes from how others perceive us. George Herbert Mead, a sociologist and philosopher, proposed that the self emerges from social interaction. We internalize others' views of us, and these reflections shape our self-image. This is what Charles Cooley called the looking glass self. So, your sense of me is to some extent a social product. If you change your environment, friends, job, location, your identity can shift dramatically. This is one reason people find themselves after moving to a new city or leaving a long-term relationship. They are not discovering a inner truth. They are shedding the expectations of others. Rather than being something we locate, identity is better understood as something we develop. Psychologist Dan McAdams describes identity as a narrative, a life story that we continually edit and revise. This story gives us a sense of continuity, but it's not always consistent or accurate. It's more like a draft than a finished product. In other words, finding yourself is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing activity. Your identity is updated by experience, altered by reflection, and shaped by relationships. There's no final version, just continuous revision. So, if you're trying to find yourself, it's worth asking, who is searching and what exactly are you hoping to find? The self, as psychology and philosophy suggests, is not a fixed object buried deep inside us. It's not a hidden truth or a clean, unchanging essence. It's an evolving pattern of thoughts, habits, roles, and stories, none of which are permanent. Part of you doing the searching, the observing awareness, is always there. It doesn't need to be found. What can change is the narrative, and that's something you have control over. So perhaps the real task isn't finding yourself, it's choosing who to become and accepting that you will never be finished.